Hopefully we can get this done in 2 or 3 hours.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to OpenCV Weekly Webinar. And with us, we have Jeri Ellsworth. She is an amazing entrepreneur, computer chip designer. She has been a YouTuber for quite some time now. She's an inventor. She also owns 80 pinball machines, and she was a race car driver at one point in her life. And that's just a short introduction. I don't want to go into the long introduction, for which you should just go and check out her Wikipedia page. Yes, she has a Wikipedia page as well.
It might be accurate. Who knows?
Welcome, Jeri. So glad to have you here.
Thanks. It's you guys are great. Our warm up to the presentation, I was really jiving with you guys. It's really fun. So I'm excited to talk to you guys today.
Excellent. And also with us is Phil Nelson, who is the content manager at opencv.org. He puts together these webinars and has been a constant presence since day one.
Howdy, folks. Yes, I am still here somehow. Thanks again for joining us this week. I'm really excited about this episode. As always, we'll be doing questions and answers from you in the audience, so please use the Zoom Q&A button to ask your question at any point during the webinar. And if it's contextually appropriate, we'll maybe butt in with it, or at the very end of the webinar, we'll rapid fire do a few answers to those. We'll also be doing a giveaway. Jeri has generously allowed us to give away a TiltFive system. These will fulfill after the Kickstarter units fulfill, of course. And this giveaway will be limited to North America and Europe, but we'll also be giving away an OpenCV Courses 1 to a lucky trivia winner from anywhere in the world. Yeah, good luck, everybody.
That's great. And while I was introducing Jeri, I was just looking at my notes, what other things I missed. I completely missed that she did an amazing Kickstarter campaign with more than $1.7 million raised, and they are about to deliver the product in just a few days.
Yeah,
so
matter of days.
Achievement. So let's get started, Jeri. Take it from here.
Okay, let me figure out how to share. It's always interesting on a Linux machine.
Looks good.
Looks good. All right. So, some of you may have heard my story before. I'm going to try to cruise through some of these kind of historical things fast so we can get to the fun machine vision-y things. But I think it's important to share some of this. And as I was putting the presentation together, I started to see a common thread with some of these projects that I worked on. And I wanted to title this, it's a little bit about timing and a whole lot of luck. Some of these projects were, very successful, and it was just pure luck and just being there at the right time. And some should have been successful, but the timing was just a little bit off. And that's anyone that's worked in tech has probably felt that multiple times through their career. So some of my background, I was a really weird, nerdy kid. I was into electronics. I took apart all my toys, pissed my father off because I was destroying, all these expensive toys and stuff. But this was my favorite toy of all, which was one of these 101 electronic kits where you could build things like radio transmitters and buzzers to annoy people in the house. And I think from birth, I was probably an engineer. It was just genetic. I just had to know how everything worked, and I was pretty fearless about it.
That's a really cool looking one. I think I had a crappier Edmund Scientific one, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I had multiples of these as a kid. I had this blue one that had more projects you could do.
Well, the little springs end up getting pulled out over time, where they get snagged on your coat or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Or you let the magic smoke out of those transistors in the middle, and then you can't build half the projects. This was great. These were awesome. And I think probably a lot of children of the 80s remember working with those. Well, this was my first computer. I was an early computer adopter. I didn't even know how to spell at the time. Basically, I was just just enamored with computers. And I was very fortunate. My father bought me this Commodore 64, and I just was obsessed with it. Kind of funny story around the Commodore 64 and how kind of naive I was about even electronics at the time is I didn't understand how these video game cartridges work that plugged in the back. And I thought that I could make my own video games by putting forks and knives into the cartridge slot. And every time I did that, I would get rewarded by beautiful colors and weird sounds coming out of the computer. I ended up burning up a couple of these computers, and my father was mystified, why these crummy Commodore 64s were burning out all the time. But, through my childhood and teens, I progressed through all the early computers. And I think working on computers like this is really important. I think the equivalent today is probably like working on Arduinos. It teaches you how to be super lean and efficient because you don't have a lot of processing power to work with. And I'm very happy that I got this start. So I was a bit of a wild child in high school. I was like the kid that was picked on, and then I just went totally wild and started doing the goth thing and running with the bad kids. But I also was a bit of a thrill seeker at the time too. And I was working with my father at his gas station. And in the area, this little tiny town in Oregon, there were a couple racetracks around. And I'm like, wow, that's the most wild thing ever. I've got to do that. And so I begged my father to build me a race car. He's like, absolutely not. I'll never do that for you. You'll kill yourself. And I begged and begged and begged. And finally, I got him to cave a little bit. And he said, if you come up with enough money to buy one or build one, that's the only way you're going to race. And obviously working for minimum wage, I think it was like $3 an hour back then, or maybe $3.50 an hour. There was no way I was going to buy a race car. So I had to build the thing.
That won't even get you a gallon of regular gas these days.
No doubt. It definitely won't get you even a quarter of a gallon of racing fuel. So
racing fuel, yeah.
So I went around, it became my mission. I'm like, I can do this. I'm pretty fearless. I can figure out how to weld and machine metal and do this.
How old were you?
I was 16.
Wow.
Yeah, so I signed up for the high school shop class, and then I went around to all the machine shops in the area, and I found this one machinist that took me under his wing. And in exchange for coming in on the weekends and cleaning all of his machines and stuff like that, he taught me how to weld and turn metal and use the milling machine. And I started putting this thing together. And partway through it, my father's like, he'd raced in the past also. He's like, well, I better get in here and help and be supportive, or you are going to kill yourself. And so went out, started racing cars, did terrible the first year. But then I met some folks, some mentors that taught me how to improve the car and be better at designing them, and started winning a lot of races, started selling a lot of cars. I was an early entrepreneur, added computers to them to collect telemetry, and also traction control systems and a bunch of things to cheat. So,
wow.
Which got banned over and over again. It was a great experience, but it was a pretty hard business.
Yeah, if you're early enough, it's not against the rules yet. So,
well, one of my mentors, an old-time NASCAR chassis builder, he said, if it's not in the rules, it's legal. So just consider that.
That's
so,
true.
So in this i5 racing circuit, a couple rules that are in there today are because of me, like no traction control, no brake lights. I put brake lights into the car to kind of have a psychological effect on the.
Love it.
Yeah, I put brake
even when you are not braking.
Yeah, correct. It was randomly it would turn on.
All right.
Psychological warfare on the racetrack.
No motorized suspension control. I had these linear actuators I put on the suspension to adjust it in real time as I was driving down the track. And so, yes, thanks to me, if anyone races that circuit, that was me. I got tired of racing. It was a really tough business. And a friend of mine from high school, he had tricked a wholesaler of computer parts that sold computer parts to sell them wholesale parts. And he's like, this computer I built was like $600 or $700 worth of parts, but it normally sells for like $1,400 or $1,500. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that's really good profit for not a lot of work. And so I'm like, I said, I'll sell all my race car stuff. We'll bootstrap a computer store business, because this was 1995 and Windows 95 hadn't even come out yet. But AOL was becoming a thing, and you could just see the writing on the wall that it was going to be very lucrative. And so I did that, and immediately me and my business partner started butting heads because I'm this wild kid, gothy, didn't know how to talk to customers, swearing every other word. And my business partner booted me out. And I forgot to mention, because of racing cars, I ended up dropping out of high school, which my father was really upset about that. He was really upset. And after the after the race cars, he's like, and I was saying I was going to do the computer stores. He's like, well, maybe you should just go back to college and get a degree in this downtime. I'm like, no, I'm just going to do this. And then I lost everything when my business partner booted me out. And of course, my father and friends are like, go back to school, go back to school. I'm like, no, I'm out for revenge. I'm going to put him out of business. So I moved out of my apartment, got my deposit back. I rented this little tiny shop, lived in the back of it, ate ramen noodles, was just,
So, and this is all before the age of 18?
No, I was probably 21 at this
21,
point,
okay.
ish, something like that.
Okay. So about 21, you had built race cars, driven professionally as a race car driver. You had dropped out of high school, started a computer store, and we are just getting started.
Yeah, I gotta move on or we're not gonna get to it.
Awesome.
But what was really amazing is across the street from this little computer store I opened was an insurance salesman, and he would bring me lunch, and he kind of took a liking to me. And he was another mentor that entered my life at that point. And he's like, there's this thing called relatability. Maybe you shouldn't be wearing like Doc Martens and swearing in front of your customers, maybe tone down the dark eyeliner and stuff like that. And I admired him because he was successful, and I gradually adopted these things. And hey, sure enough, the business started to take off. I could sell things. And
so wait, I'm not supposed to curse in front of the customers?
I've learned in recent years, sometimes, it's good to curse in front of your clients when you need to really make a point, but you got to do it sparingly, very sparingly. Yeah, it took off. I had 5 stores by the mid 90s. So 1997 or so, I had 5 stores all up and down I-5, and I was doing really great in the computer stores. And at this time I was like, all right, I've got some money, and there's like this really cool electronic thing called an FPGA that is fairly new, and I can afford to buy the tools for it. And I started playing with FPGAs in my spare time, and thank goodness I did, because a few years later, around 2000, the whole computer store market imploded, and it just was not profitable. I ended up giving my stores away to my employees, and it's like, if you could ever like turn a profit and pay me back for the inventory, that's cool. Otherwise, it's yours. And what's kind of cool is there's one of the stores still in business today in Canby, Oregon.
Wow.
I don't know if it's changed hands or anything, but yeah, I never got my inventory. I don't mind at all. I'm very proud of them for making it work.
That's great.
So during this time, I built all of these like interesting little circuit boards with these Altera FPGAs and Xilinx and Lattice FPGAs. I guess it was mostly Lattice FPGAs at the time because they had really cheap tools. And
give me a little context. Of course, you had so much experience by now because you were, designing these. You had a computer store. You were playing around with these things. But when these things came out, was it sufficient to just read the manual and start programming these? How back in the day? I'm guessing there's nobody around you who even knew remotely about the stuff that you were doing. So you were pretty much alone by yourself, maybe with a manual, right?
Yeah, the very early things I worked on were CPLDs, and they had a couple reference designs. So and these chips were very, very simplistic. So, they only had a few logic cells. You could only do a few things like, a couple inputs and a couple outputs on them. But fortunately for me, I don't know how I ran into this gentleman, but he worked at Intel, And as a side project, he was emulating a 6502 processor in an FPGA, and he kind of took me under his wing and taught me VHDL, the language that you can use to code up for these things. Later on, I did Verilog because that's what everyone in Silicon Valley does. But and I started getting into doing more complex things, like made video generation circuits that could generate VGA output, sound generators, IO controllers.
That chip, the 6502 is, one of the more legendary microprocessors, like, the NES, Commodore 64, BBC Micro, Atari. Like, probably I'm leaving out a dozen other things that people would know it from, right?
Yeah, I heard recently, I did toys later on, I'll get to that, but the 6502 is one of the most built processors ever. They're still using them today. Like if you go get a toy, it probably has some kind of stripped down version of the 6502. And there are some weird ones out there that
you can still buy these 46-year-old chips.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I started going to retro computer shows and showing people like, hey, I've emulated a 6502 and I made this little circuit board. I called it the Commodore 1 all-in-one FPGA emulator or something. I can't remember, but I made this circuit board in the upper right where it had a bunch of FPGAs on it, which these days are absolutely dinky, but it was
Did you
fun.
ever go to Homebrew, computer hobbyist place?
No, I don't think they were doing that by the time I got to Silicon Valley, but
Okay.
or maybe they are, but the way I broke into the industry though is I went to Silicon Valley and I started going to trade shows. And at this time I had lost all my money and I was just barely like squeaking by. I was working a minimum wage job at the time and I was living up in Portland, but I was driving the Greyhound or riding the Greyhound bus down to Silicon Valley, and I'd go to events like Embedded Systems Conference, and couldn't afford to pay to get in. So I would coattail in or find a side door to sneak in. And then once I was in there, I had my duffel bag with all these circuit boards in it. And I'd just shake everybody's hands like, hi, I'm Jeri, here, want to take a look at these circuits that I've designed and these FPGA designs. And
open up your coat, want to buy a watch?
Yeah, that's basically it. I mean, looking back, thank goodness I had done the racing and people had taught me how to promote and like gave me that confidence to go talk to people and talk to audiences, because if I didn't have those skills, it would have been really hard to break into, Silicon Valley. Of course, this entire time, friends and family are telling me, go back to school. What you're trying to do is insane. So I was going to all these conferences. I was getting interviews, but the interesting thing was I'd go to the interview and I'd make it like one or two interviews in and they'd cut me off early. You cut off an interview early if you don't think there's a good match. And so it usually went like this. I'm like, hey, I'm Jeri, look at all these really cool things I built. I've never worked in the industry. I'm a high school dropout, but I built race cars. And they're like, we're wasting our time with her. And they just cut the interviews off. And it was super frustrating. I went through dozens of interviews where I didn't even make it to the end of the day. But fortunately, I ran into this one gentleman, company was called Etherwire. And he took a liking to me and he's like, you have the right attitude. Like, I really want you to come work with us, come interview. And it was really frustrating because I'd met him, but then I'd have to like ride the Greyhound bus back to do the interview. I went in, did the interview. They cut me off early. I'm walking down the stairs out of the building and I ran into him coming down the stairs and he's like, where are you going? I'm like, well, they cut me off early. And he's like, what? Have you even talked to so-and-so and so-and-so? And I'm like, no, I haven't even met those people yet. And he's like, come with me. So he hauled me back upstairs. He grabbed the entire engineering team and did a panel interview with me. It was, one of the most fun interviews I've ever done. And he just hosted the thing and basically unilaterally hired me. And this was my one big chance. And so I'm like, I'm going to do the best work I can do. And I worked my arse off and did a really good job for that team. And that led to other things, And I started to develop this reputation of, call her up. And I started to also collect, other mentors to help me through things and collect like kind of team members that would kind of follow me from project to project.
Yeah, people don't realize sometimes the the power of this one chance you get and how important it is to just hit it out of the park when you get that important chance. It's super important. It can, the careers usually grow linearly, and then there are these inflection points. There are huge jumps which completely transform you, and you have to, do your best in those jumps.
Yeah, it's more of a stepper motor than a linear, just kind of chunk. Yeah.
Good analogy. Great analogy. Yeah, I think back about that quite a bit. Like at any point with those really disappointing interviews, I could have just like thrown my hands up, and who knows what I'd be doing. Maybe I could have gone back to one of my comfort zones, like go work at a computer store or something. And I'm very happy that I got lucky, really lucky. And I'm probably one of the most stubborn people you've ever met. So that all like helps. So I built my career a bit more, and then a toy company contacted me out of the blue. They'd seen some posts I put online or something about like, oh, I love these old retro computers, and I've been kind of emulating them in FPGAs. And they said like, well, you've been trying to make a Commodore 64 and a joystick that can play all your favorite 1980s games. And we can't do it. The processors at the time, this is early 2000s, and processors at the time can't emulate that computer. It'd be too expensive for us to do it. Can you make a custom ASIC for us? And I took a big gulp and I'm like, yeah, no problem. And so had never done a custom ASIC before. And they gave me about a year to get it done. And it was one of the scariest projects I ever worked on. A small team of us. I did all the hardware, all of the FPGA emulators, dev boards, circuit board layout, everything myself. And then a couple folks in this picture here did the software for it so it could automatically load games and have menus and be a good user experience. These poor programmers didn't even have color video until about a week or two before we taped out the chip. And so I didn't know anything about doing custom chips. It's a big leap going from FPGAs where you can just sling code at it, make a lot of mistakes, to this thing. It's going to be burned onto all these layers on the chip. And if you mess it up, it's scrap, right?
Right.
So we were so late and we had to get this thing out for Christmas. It was approaching summertime and you have to build during the summer to get stuff out for Christmas. So the toy company decided to just do a hot lot. It's where you just run the wafers through without testing anything. And I'm working with the foundry and they're just like, holy cow, what did we get into? Because this lady doesn't know anything about, taping out a chip, and they're like being very generous with their time and walking me through it. So they tape the chip out, they send them to China, they mount them up on the circuit board, and I get this angry call from the president of this toy company screaming at me. It's like, it didn't work. You were in so much trouble, just yelling at me. I'm like, oh God, I just cost this company millions of dollars because they built like 250,000 of these things.
Wow.
Yeah. And he's like, you get on a plane tomorrow, if possible, you're going to China, you fix this. I'm like, geez, do I need to run off to Mexico to hide from this angry guy?
Start a new life.
Yeah. I'm sorry I'm rambling on. It's taking so long, but
no, these are great stories. Please continue.
So I go to China, and fortunately for me, when they opened up the prototype and I took a look at the circuit board, I'm like, this isn't the circuit board that I sent to you guys. This is like something completely different. And the factory is like, oh, we cost reduced it.
Somebody else's circuit?
No, they had cost reduced it for me.
Okay.
And,
like, oh, we fixed it for you.
Yeah, so they were used to making toys that ran at had a 6502 and it running at 1 megahertz, but actually this thing, internally ran at 32 megahertz. You had to have pretty good layout for a 2-layer circuit board to make this thing work. And so thanks to a bunch of mentors way back, in my childhood, these ham radio operators taught me this trick. Like, if anything's not working, just put your finger on it. So that was the first thing I did, is I put my finger on the circuit board and the thing booted up, and I'm like, oh my goodness, thank goodness. It works. I have a zillion stories. I did 7 or so projects with a toy company, and many of them were chip designs. And I botched a few chip designs, but we managed to, like, either through software or through bodge wires, get these things working without losing a bunch of money. But I definitely learned the lesson of, like, test your chips before you make hundreds of thousands of these things. A quick funny side story on this too. This was almost my one and only toy design, because I put extra things on the circuit board, things like that would allow you to hook a keyboard and disk drive up to it and load your own games into it. And then the software guys added a bunch of extra games, and including some questionable ones where you, like, jump off a cliff and you're supposed to, land head first on the rocks below, called Cliff Diver. And when I was at the factory, I dropped into this secret Easter egg menu, and they saw this and they're like, oh my goodness, what did you put in our toy? This could just, like, destroy us. We could lose our child rating. But the toy was a huge success. That's a whole nother story. You can look at one of my videos of how we, after they told me I was finished in the toy business, how I, a couple friends of us and I promoted the thing and caused it to sell out within like a day or so.
Wow.
Couple days.
We'll link to the video in the final YouTube. This will be.
These were on Home Shopping Network, weren't they, back in the day?
Yeah, it was such a weird place to sell them, and Home Shopping Network was baffled. All right, I'll tell the story. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So anyway, I figure I'm finished in the business. They're mad at me, and they're so like, we're never going to do a design with you again. Like, it's been such a traumatic experience for us, and you put these extra things in there. And so my boyfriend at the time, he was really good at like spoofing websites. So he made this fake blog that was supposedly one of the workers in China that likes to hack on toys, and just backdated a bunch of stuff. And he was also like a moderator or something on Slashdot, which was super popular at the time. And he got it promoted right to the top and became this viral hit. And then the day that it launched, I think they sold like 70,000 of these things in a week or so, just like pretty much sold out everything that got shipped to QVC. But the marketing campaign at QVC was more like this. It was like, the audience is older folks. So it's like, think of when your grandkids come over, they like this new thing called video games, and they'll love you so much for like having a thing you can plug in to your TV. Right. It was a terrible marketing ploy to get rid of these things.
No, but that's
from 1984.
That's the audience, right? Those were the people watching this QVC.
Yeah, but because it went viral on Slashdot, people around the world were ordering these things, but it was only being sold or promoted domestically here in the United States. And so QVC actually called the toy company, and they're like, it's weird, about 50% of these things are going overseas. We don't understand it. We've never seen anything like this before. So after that, the toy executives are like, this is the best. You guys are awesome. And they're like, we're going to build more of these, and like, we're going to change the manual to talk about the Easter eggs. And we were telling him like, that's not how Easter eggs work.
That's right. They are Easter eggs for a reason.
You can't hunt for something if you know where it is.
Exactly. Anyway, I went on and did a bunch of toy designs for various toy companies. So it was super fun. All of them had Easter eggs. It was really, really a nice career move for me, and put me on the map too. New York Times ran this huge article about, from high school dropout to toy designer, and opened up a lot of opportunities for me. Which brings me to something that actually has relevance to computer vision. I had an opportunity to work on this particular chip here. I know there's a Commodore 64 thing on this slide. I'll get to that, but I was hired to work on this chip that was called Pipe Wrench. It was a reconfigurable processor, really cutting edge for the time. It really baffled me what this thing was going to be used for. It was basically a virtual CPU pipeline that allowed you to reconfigure the pipeline on every single clock cycle. So you could fill this thing up with data, and you can make a virtual CPU pipeline as deep as you want, and it would fetch through this huge bus, new instructions to the CPU, and then it would execute the previous CPUs. But it had this weird quirk to it. It couldn't branch. And so as I'm working on this thing, I'm like, I just don't get it. Who's going to use a processor that can't branch? And they're like, no, 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 this thing is, you can make an ALU as wide as you want and as deep as you want. And you just process everything in parallel. And it's going to be good for this thing called machine learning. And this is in the early 2000s.
Right.
And I'm like, I just don't get it. But we built it. And really smart algorithms, people like trying to explain to me like how big this opportunity is going to be. So anyway, we taped the chip out, it comes back. I had built a circuit board for it and we needed to bring it up, and they were going to use embedded Linux running on an ARM processor. And I just got spidey senses that the Linux team was not going to get this embedded Linux running in time to bring up the chip. And so I had just done this Commodore 64 in a, in an FPGA. So I stripped it way down. And then I took a couple IOs on the FPGA on this like board that we had built and hooked it up to a monitor, hooked up a keyboard, hooked up an old classic disk drive to the thing so I could write programs. And I started to bring the chip up, and my manager was so mad at me. He's like, you're wasting time. The Linux folks are going to have the operating system going in no time,
Right.
And it was just this big, like, contentious thing. I'd come in the evenings and do this secretly. Had the whole chip up and running. I had all these little basic programs that could test all the various pieces. And it turned out the Linux team was way behind, like months behind.
Wow.
And so anyway, it's kind of a fun story of like how I brought, super modern chip up with a Commodore 64. But this is another one of those like timing things. Like this is early 2000s.
Right.
And, people weren't really adopting and using machine learning at the time.
Yeah.
And so this poor company like struggled and never really got any adoption. The funny thing is, a few years ago, I went to a seminar and listened to folks from Google that were doing their machine learning chips. And I'm like, sounds very, very similar to what we were doing like 18 years ago. Right. So
there's that old analogy of you got to skate to where the puck is going to be, and sometimes you just skate right past it.
Yeah,
puck's not going to be there for a while.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's analogies like that in racing too. So if there's a crash in front of you, steer towards the crash, because chances are the cars are not going to be there, by the time the crash is over. So
wow.
I don't know, maybe that works. I don't know for this analogy. So yeah, I'm really, at this point in my career, I'm really digging like these super high-end chips. So I took another job. This chip was a chip that was going to do transcoding of video. So you could take 8 streams of HD video in and then transcode it down to play on your video iPod. And so this company was founded because video iPod was going to be the next hit. Right. And they were sure of it. And so we start working on this chip, and it was one of the hardest chips I've ever designed. And like someone snapped a picture of me because I'd been there all night, working on this chip, and I'd fallen asleep on my chair. What was really cool about this and kind of relevant to, machine vision is, what I love about video compression is they make these standards and they tell you how to decode it, but they don't tell you how to encode it. Right. Yeah, which is really an interesting challenge.
Yeah.
And this is early to mid 2000s. And this is before you could just, spin up an ARM processor and do video compression and decompression. It was difficult to do. Mm-hmm. And so we're working on this chip. The team was just a really like a skeleton crew. There was probably like 6 or 7 of us working on it. But we had to process this video at an insane rate. So the folks in the company gave us a budget. Like, okay, you have a macro block and it's got so many pieces of data. You only have 300 clock cycles to get it all done. And so we had to do some really creative work around this to actually make it hit that clock budget. And I love working on projects like this where it's highly constrained, because you come up with some of the most creative solutions. At this time, H.264 was a brand new spec, and MPEG-4 was new. And it was very clear that the spec was written by software folks and not hardware folks, because there were like these crazy things where bit orders got reversed in the pipeline. So you couldn't just pipeline the whole thing. And so I came up with some really clever, like corner turning memories and stuff in this to be able to process and then kind of reverse direction on this data speculatively, because it could flip, it could be forward encoded or reverse encoded, just kind of on a whim. And the amount of silicon we threw at this thing to just do some of these things in hardware was insane. The other thing that was really cool, and this was kind of my first taste in machine vision, I didn't actually get to do any of the work on this piece of it, but I was super intrigued, was the de-interlacer. So, video comes in progressive and interlaced. So old NTSC and PAL video is like every other scan line gets updated. And so some of you may have seen this where video has got jaggies in it. And the team was working on a de-interlacer, and they were doing all of this motion vector based de-interlacing. So they were trying to interpret the video and the motion in the video, and they were throwing tons and tons of hardware at this. And the thing that really stuck out to me was the algorithm folks would come up with these amazing algorithms on paper. They should just look beautiful. Right, because it's taking into consideration all this motion. But it turns out the human eye is so sensitive to even like the smallest like perturbed pixel.
So a lot of those motion estimation, optical flow based, they calculate the motion vectors, but the challenge is that it needs to be very, very accurate. Otherwise, you see these little glitches. Even if you mess up one pixel, right, it's going to show up. That one pixel will stand out. It's pretty frustrating how and the speed requirement, right? With these kinds of things, you need to be very, very fast.
Yeah, I mean, if you have all the time in the world to just crank on frames, you can do a great job. But if it has to be done in like 300 clocks, but kudos to the person that was doing the SAD detector, sum of absolute differences. He like made this really clever system that was taking all the motion vectors, for the encoded video and passing that to the de-interlacer. But in the end of the day, we would do side-by-side tests, like, which video do you like the best? And every time everyone liked the simplest one, which is you just kind of do a blend between, between previous fields, and sometimes even just throwing away fields was the right way to do it. So it was super fun. Here's another timing story, which is kind of interesting. So video iPod's going to be the biggest thing ever. It wasn't, as you may remember. And so this company is now scrambling to find a home for this amazing chip. It could do amazing things. Fortunately for us, TiVo started to become a thing.
For a short period of time, a few years, right? TiVo was a big thing.
Yeah, people probably don't even remember it now.
They still make them, by the way.
Do they? Oh, maybe they're still using this chip.
No joke, they exist.
Yeah, TiVo was like YouTube for like 5 years.
I loved my TiVo. It was amazing.
It's still probably the best, like one of the better UIs for that kind of time shifted stuff. That was really their hardware wasn't like super cheap and slow, and the UI was pretty well designed, and
They did great with the sound too. I just remember the satisfying like blip it makes when you like moved back and forth. And yeah. People always forget about audio when they're designing products. But, fortunately for this company, like TiVo really needed to take, huge files, crunch them down, put them on a hard drive and be able to play them back really fast. So kudos to that management team to get this chip, recover it and get it into a product. So at this time, I went to work at a couple companies that did video related stuff. I went and worked for NewTek that was doing the TriCaster at the time, and they were doing this video streaming box. And I'm like, wow, this new thing called YouTube's coming out and streaming. I should figure out what it's all about. So I started a YouTube channel, and I'm like, well, I might as well just do what I like. And in my garage, I'd been just doing all kinds of crazy experiments. So I just started YouTubing these various projects I worked on. Like I have a a chip foundry in my garage I'd put together, had an electron microscope, sputter coaters. I love
It's an
to,
electron microscope.
yeah, it's my electron microscope in the lower left-hand corner there.
Oh, I see.
Right next to the Commodore 64 base.
Right.
Yeah. And so it's like all this random weird stuff. And it's interesting. I did this YouTube thing just kind of to give back because so many people mentored me over the years, but also it's opened up so many opportunities for me.
Oops.
Uh-oh, I think we lost her. The
wait.
Linux strikes again, maybe. There you are, you're back.
Oh, sorry, but I guess I ran over, didn't I?
No. I think you just had a crash or something.
Oh, Linux.
Yeah. All right, we're all good. Actually, we can take this. We could take this time to do our trivia giveaway, so then we can go over on the end, and it won't be as big of a deal. So let's do trivia. The way this works, if you've never done it before, everybody in the chat there, is I'm going to ask 2 questions, one after the other. We'll get the answer for one first, and then move on to the next one. The first one will be for a free, version of OpenCV Courses 1 that'll be open to anyone in the world. If you've won recently, please don't answer. Give other people a chance to get some free stuff. The second thing will be a TiltFive system, which will be limited to North America and Europe. Again, if you've won something, kind of, give other people a chance.
And it's after we've caught up with our Kickstarter and back orders. I don't want our Kickstarter folks to be mad that.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So all you got to do is type the answer into the Zoom chat window, and the first person to do that on my screen will win these things. First, for the OpenCV courses, what was the name of that first computer shop? Oh, wow, Jacob already got it. I didn't even get to finish asking the question. Computers Made Easy. Yeah, Jacob Van Bergek. Jacob, please send an email to phil@opencv.org, and we'll make sure you get your courses.
How did he respond so fast?
Oh,
they do it every week.
They are pros. They know, the format.
They do it every week.
That's insane.
So the next one, which will be for a TiltFive, which will ship after Kickstarter orders are fulfilled, of course, and is limited to North America and Europe. So if you're not in either of those regions, please don't answer this one. Or if you do, you won't be able to get the thing. What was the name of the home shopping channel that the Commodore 64 joystick was sold on? Ooh, some people are typing so fast they're missing letters.
you got
Nick,
all the
you
letters.
almost got it, Nick. You were so close. Looks like Andrew Perkins here got QVC first.
Yay.
On my screen. So congratulations. Also, please send me one email to phil@opencv.org, and I'll hook you up with the TiltFive team and make sure you get your free stuff.
I suspect these folks are using AI to do this so fast. They're probably using predictive.
They could have, yeah. It could be. Maybe I'm just that predictable. They just know what I'm going to pull out for questions. But yeah, let's go ahead and continue your presentation, Jeri.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I don't know where I got cut off exactly, but because I did this YouTube channel.
Can you get your slides back up again?
Oh,
I think we lost them.
So sorry.
It's okay.
I also love what's behind you.
Oh yeah.
The background, the most interesting background among all our guests until now.
I probably should have done it in my garage, shouldn't I?
Cat Scott had a pretty cool background too, a bunch of different instruments and like plotters and crap back there. But yeah, all right, let's go.
All right, am I back? Can you see it all?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so because my YouTube channel, it was pretty amazing. It opened up a lot of opportunities for me. Folks just became fans of like the wacky science I was doing, which is all over the board. It could be magnetic logic, it could be semiconductors. And so companies like AnyBots and other places would just contact me like, oh, I saw this random video you did. You're perfect to come work with us. And I threw this in because I think it's kind of relevant. Sensors are a big part of, what we do. And I've never met a group of more optimistic engineers about computer vision than folks in robotics.
Right.
So this is, again, it's still in the mid to late 2000s, and the things that they were planning on doing here was incredible. Like if they could even achieve like 10% of it, the robot overlords would probably be, storming our houses and, taking over. But this was a fun project. I also remember this one fondly because it's the first time a robot almost killed me. First day on the job, they're having trouble with it's self-balancing, so it has these really strong
I like
motors.
that you said the first time.
Yeah. It's happened a couple times. So I show up there and they're having trouble with this control system to balance the robot. It's blowing out the motor drivers, and it's these really powerful motor drivers. And so they take me to this rig and they're like, here's the brains of the system, and we have this test rig. It has this giant weight on a motor and there's controllers right next to it. I'm like, oh, cool. I grabbed the board, not even thinking about what I was doing. I flipped the board to look at the backside of it. And this is before, really fancy, nice, small IMUs. This is a big clunky, like aerospace IMU, and it's not even bolted down to the circuit board. So this IMU is on a flex circuit. It flips over on its side, and this motor starts spinning because it's trying to tip this IMU upright. And I don't know what I just did. This motor is taking off at like huge speed. This big heavy weight's not balanced. The whole table is like shaking. I flipped the board back down. The thing's still running, out of control. And one of the other engineers runs across the room and like yanks the power on this apparatus. And just like this huge shower of sparks like shoot out of the circuit board right up into my face, like from the motor controllers.
Wow.
And because all the back EMF on this motor, because it's going like 10,000 RPMs or something. And I'm like visibly shaken by this. And they're like, well, that's our problem. The motor drivers are blowing up.
I had a really similar thing happen with a double robot one time. You remember the telepresence, you put an iPad in the top and you plug it into a base. We've got a battery in there, so they couldn't even unplug it from the wall. It had been in the closet for a couple of months, and like I got it back out, update the firmware, get up the app open, turn it on, only one of the motors in the wheels is working.
Oh no.
And so it turns on, flips over, and just starts spinning like mad on the ground and like clocks me in the ankle. I'm like, what the hell? What did I do to you, robot?
This was such a fun job. These guys here had a biped robot as well. I was curious if they were still in business. I took a quick look. I think they are. It's pretty amazing. Out of all the telepresence robots, I thought this was the cutest one. I might be biased. But I also had the opportunity to work on rockets. Here's another place where computer vision is really playing a huge role right now. I didn't do any computer vision for them. They hired me. A friend of mine is the CEO of the company. Basically, the story was like, oh, my flight computer guy like rage quit on me. We have to launch this thing in like 4 months, and I have no one to work on the flight computer. You got to get it done. And I'm like, I don't want to work on it. I don't think it's my thing. He's like, we're just up here in Alameda. Come up, but you have to come up on Thursday. It's got to be Thursday. I'm like, okay. So I walk in the door. I see this big rocket laying in the high bay. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'm a space nerd. Like, he knew my weakness. And then he's like, follow me, gave me like the deluxe tour. And then he's like, we have a test cell here too for test firing the engines. You want to press the go button?
Nice.
And so he let me hit an enter or something on the keyboard to do the countdown. The ground starts shaking, there's fire. And I'm like, God damn it. Okay, fine. But you only have me for like 4 months. I'll get this done for you. It was pretty intense. Aerospace is an interesting place to work because different set of rules than consumer products. So there was all kinds of interesting stories around the FAA coming in and looking at these really janky prototypes that I put together. Like I had no time to like build circuit boards. So I'd like glommed a bunch of dev boards together, and like they'd come in to like test the telemetry. And I'm like, trust me, this hot glued together dev board with a bunch of level translators really is a flight computer. It'll be
Right.
also, it's kind of funny, as the rocket was so small, these guys from the FAA were like, kept calling it a missile and offending everybody.
It's funny how secretive some of these most of the projects are. We are working on some project that I cannot mention, but I like to say that it's going to land something somewhere. So, but the funny thing is that the requirements are so intense in terms of, oh, you have so little processing power, you cannot use all the modern stuff. In fact, the algorithms that are used are they were the 1970s, 1980s algorithm, because you cannot fit the the requirements, the processing requirements, the memory footprint has to be so small.
Power consumption.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but very interesting projects that even with those things, you can do a lot, right? You can actually land something somewhere.
I was amazed working on this flight computer. I have a couple stories related to what you just said. So we used a FPGA with a couple ARM cores in it. And so the processing of this thing had to be deterministic, right? So the telemetry had to take things like GPS and IMU and pressures and stuff like that and get it to the ground. And we had to prove to the FAA that no matter what happened with these ARM processors, they would always get good data because they have someone sitting there to blow the thing up if it goes off course. They don't. So
right.
I would put together these proposals like, okay, I'm going to make a state machine in an FPGA that's doing the insane things like taking ASCII characters from the GPS module, converting those into a bit stream on this super antiquated iRig protocol, which was made back in the 60s to just take pulse width modulated signals off of missiles, literally missiles, and send it to the ground with no checksums, no error correcting, nothing on it. Right. And I'm putting these proposals like, this is what it's going to be like. The FAA folks would just reject it immediately. And I'm like, it's so perfect. I laid it out so perfectly. They're like, we got to have a meeting. They fly in, we have a meeting. I'm like whiteboarding this stuff out, PowerPoint presenting like this, the state machine, can never go into a bad state. It's always going to deliver GPS. And their eyes were just rolling in the back of their head. They're like, okay, approved. I'm sure they didn't understand, half of what I was saying. But it was cool. We got it done. And this is the thing launched and then blew up.
Oh.
And they launched and blew up a couple times. And I actually got a souvenir. This is what a flight computer looks like after it's been ejected out of a blown up rocket. The thing traveled like a half mile or something. It was actually sticking out of the side of one of the buildings at the launch facility. I begged them to give me the picture of this tremendous. Like piece of the rocket hanging off the facility. They wouldn't do it. They're like, no, bad PR.
way too cool, bad PR.
But they made it to space, which is really cool. And so kudos to them. And they just had an amazing launch the other day. So if you look up Astra rockets, they had a failure again, where one of the engines stopped shortly after it took off and the rocket went sideways. So for, many, many meters, this thing flew perfectly sideways before it lost enough weight that it could go up. It was incredible. So the algorithms team that wrote the code for this thing, pats on the back for keeping a rocket upright. Normally they just tip over and explode. But yeah, you were saying like, it's so primitive and slow. Like, I can't remember what the update rate was for the master loop, but it was something low, and it was a benefit to kind of like update the motors super slow, like at 15 hertz. So these ARM processors would wake up and then just sleep 90% of the time.
And the other thing we did was with this project that there's these super smart people who are working for, half their consulting rate on this. The carrot is, the carrot is that, they say, I don't work at this rate. And then you would say that, yeah, you can go and work for some other big companies where you'll be optimizing ad displays or something, or you could work on going to space, right?
Yeah. Do you want to blow stuff up, or do you want to make ads more effective?
Exactly. That's funny you brought that up. I probably could have worked for double anywhere else than this place, but it was a friend, short project, it was exciting. So, now let's get into like real machine vision stuff, the stuff that I probably should have got to about an hour ago. So Valve Software hired me to run their hardware R&D department, which is a pretty fun story. Much like the rocket company, I was pushing them away. It's like, I don't want to work for a software company that's trying to get into hardware. And they kept contacting me over and over again, and they would show up at events. So I collect pinballs, like you said. So I'd be at a pinball conference, and then someone would step up next to me being playing pinball, like, hey, you're Jeri, right? Hey, I'm from Valve. You'd be perfect to work with us. I'm like, I'd be at Maker Faire, and like they'd walk up and like, hey, we're from Valve. I'm like, what is up with these Valve software people?
Guys talking into his collar like target acquired.
It was super flattering. And
professional stalking.
I was happy with the gig I was doing. It's like, why would I leave? And so Gabe Newell, the founder of the company, flew down to Portland, took me out to lunch, was really putting the pressure on. He's like, just please come up for just an afternoon to Seattle. I was living in Portland at the time. And he's like, it's not an interview. I'm like, okay, I'll come up for an afternoon, talk to you folks. And I get there, it was a lie. It was totally an interview. It was my second most entertaining interview ever. It was a panel interview again. So it was a whole room of like probably half dozen engineers just asking questions like, we want to make a game controller. How would you do it? I'd be like, I'd go to this JDM and we do this and that. And I swear Gabe must have done like a nose signal or something. And then just all of a sudden everyone left. And it was just me and Gabe in the room. And he's like, follow me. And so he took me to the 4th floor of the building, like, this whole floor is yours, hire all your best people, bring them in, unlimited budget, your grand mission. This is what I want you to do. Is right now our audience is pretty narrow. It's hardcore gamers on this Steam platform that they have. And Microsoft keeps edging in and trying to push us off the Windows platform. I want the entire family to play games together. So I want grandma, grandpa, all the way down to the grandkids playing games together. And you got what it takes. So I was like, well, I don't know. And he's like, just stay one more day. Like, we'll put you up in a hotel. And I'm like, well, I didn't bring any toiletries. Maybe I can fly back another day. He's like, you need to stay. Like, okay, I'll stay, but I don't have any clothes. And like, well, we'll get people to help you out with that. And so they took me to the swag closet. They gave me some like Valve t-shirts, and then they took me out to like a store to get underwear and toothpaste and all that stuff and put me up.
This is like a movie.
I couldn't believe it. It was the most bizarre thing ever and super flattering. And so I come back the next day wearing my Valve t-shirt, and I thought about it over the night. I guess I'm in. Like, I'm already wearing the t-shirt. Let's do this. And other like interesting challenges were coming up, because they wanted me to start like immediately. And they're like, maybe we can go to this big corporation you're working for, because I needed to give 2 weeks and like wind down. And they're like, well, maybe we can go to the corporation and just pay them off to get you earlier. I'm like, I can't do that. Like, I take too much pride in my projects. I got to make sure I wrap it up. So,
well, you probably have coworkers that you don't want to leave hanging and stuff, right? Like it's, yeah.
Yeah. Again, flattering, but I stood strong and like, I'll just, I'll give you part-time in the evenings and stuff, and we'll get going. And that's what I did, put together this dream team, and we started researching everything about video games we could. Like, how could we make them more fun? Like, we were hooking electrodes to people's heads and feeding it back into the game engine to drive the director of the game. Learned all kinds of interesting things.
There was a lot of EEG stuff going on for a little while, I feel like, wasn't there?
Oh, tons of it. We could never figure out how to productize it though, because we really wanted to take people's emotions and feed it back into the game. Because we were doing these tests, and games were more fun if you could understand people's emotional reaction. You didn't even have to know if it was a good or bad reaction. You just had to understand it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the one interesting takeaway from all those experiments that I still think of today is we were using the game Left 4 Dead, where there's hordes of zombies that come after you.
And it has that AI director thing built into it. Yeah.
And there's a scary sound that starts to play just before the zombies come to you. And first we're like, well, every time someone has an emotional reaction and it dips, let's just send another horde of zombies to fight them. And they didn't have as much fun. But we found that if we played the sound, got the emotional reaction, and then took the sound away and let their emotional reaction settle back out, then play the sound again and send a horde of zombies, they had way more fun. Yeah, it was really cool stuff.
Yeah,
back then I wasn't,
let them think it's okay and then bring it up again, right?
Super satisfying, even for myself. Like when I was doing the tests, I'm like, oh, it was so satisfying. Like I got a reprieve, like they didn't come. And then the sound starts again and it's like heightened even more. And then here they come. So yeah, back then I wasn't thinking too much about ethics. I think a lot more about ethics these days. It's like, you know, and I think a lot of engineers need to start thinking about like how addictive they're making technology.
Right.
Back then, was that?
I said I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I mean, back then I wasn't even thinking, are we making this too addictive? So, yeah.
I think we did not understand that it would be too addictive, right? And the consequences of it. It was like, oh, the fact that you could make it too addictive is interesting enough, right? So you're not thinking about the consequences because you have never seen anything or the consequences of what happens when it becomes too addictive. So
yeah, I'm absolutely frightened by companies like Facebook that are working in the XR space, where they're going to have all this biometric data. They're going to understand your emotions better than you do. You know, you have a company like that's motivated by, you know, profits and selling you whatever some sketchy person decides to sell you, political, you know, scammy stuff.
Yeah, the most advanced system for understanding, like they're quantifying people, and we're using it to sell soap.
Mm-hmm. Yep, or worse.
Soap and extremism.
Yeah. But this was a great opportunity for, I don't know, probably about 3 years. We just did really hardcore research on like, how can we bring the family together to play games? We did VR and AR, different controllers, biometrics, like can we put a camera on a game controller and look at the pupil dilation of your eyes? And we started towards the end of my term at Valve, we started to divide up into groups to productize things. And I was super excited about augmented reality, because augmented reality really brings people together. You can see each other, you can have holograms popping out of the table, you can have these play styles, which are super intuitive. So, you know, instead of a game controller, you could just directly reach in and touch things, or you can use a magic wand to poke things. And so it opens it up for a bigger audience. And then that's when the conflict started in Valve. So we're all going off in our own corners to start working on stuff. There was a bunch of VR folks, there were some Steambox folks, there were game controller, and then a group of us were working on AR. And all of our offices started looking like this, you know, because we're doing room scale tracking and we're doing all this machine vision, and it wasn't easy back then like it is today.
Right.
And
I mean, these are very popular now too. The tags are used in a lot of applications.
I think one of my patents at Valve was like how to make an invisible April tag. Okay. And we came up with this clever way to do it with infrared light and like hide it underneath infrared transmissive
Interesting.
dyes and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I bought some of that infrared ink at one point. I wish I knew where it was, because at Occipital we had, you know, speckle pattern laser projector, and so I was forever like, even like our CES booths and stuff, I would try to hide little things you could only see in infrared, you know, if you had the like the iPad on or whatever.
That's awesome. It was kind of funny. This is a little funny side story. We were staring at these April tags for so long, we'd start to see images in them. You know,
Jesus, or something, you know.
So it's a Rorschach test, yeah.
Or Einstein, if you're the more scientific kind.
yeah, ghost and trash can fire, wizard beard. My favorite, which was the origin of the universe for the AR team. So every time we would calibrate a camera system, it was pooping bird. And so we were dewarping
the
lenses.
one looks just like a Dwarf Fortress, little avatar from the game Dwarf Fortress. It looks exactly like it.
Our team was a little off center for sure, working on this stuff. But you know, machine vision folks, you've done the chicken dance, right? With, you know, dewarping lenses and stuff. And I don't know how many weeks of my life has been spent in rooms like this, like waving an AR headset with a camera on it in front of April tags and stuff like
tilting
that.
it left to right, translating it. Just, yeah.
It's funny. I just opened up an old archive hard drive from way back when, and I found a bunch of pictures of me sitting in front of a camera with a checkerboard with the most bored look on my face, just hundreds of them. But yeah, it was pretty amazing. We were building all these rigs. Like, what if you had zero latency in a system? Like, this was a crazy contraption we put together that had encoders and a big giant bearing you could stick your head through and like spin this display and like give instant feedback to the game engine, just to see how far we had to go to make a good experience. And then as far as like sensors and machine vision, we were doing all kinds of crazy stuff that was pretty amazing. One person on the team had these super expensive quad photo diodes. It's basically 4 giant pixels. He was shooting lasers at it and having galvos that would follow, the laser would follow these photo diodes wherever you moved it. It was like almost instantaneous, because, you know, cameras weren't very good a decade ago for doing machine vision. They were all rolling shutter, and all the global shutter ones were too big and terrible.
See the famed Half-Life garden gnome there as well.
Yeah, that I'm going to get to why I got fired, and this is probably part of the reason is, you know, the software folks were complaining that the AR rig was just way too heavy in the front, because we had this big global shutter camera on the front of it. And so what did we do? We put a garden gnome to balance it.
You needed a counterweight.
I had not noticed this. I just noticed it.
We were working on some really interesting tracking stuff back in the time. The thing that I thought was the most promising, maybe still even today, was we were using these insanely fast single line image sensors. And so I created this spherical lens system that had one linear sensor horizontal and one vertical, and they run at thousands of hertz. And so you can have modulated LEDs out in the scene. You can pick them up and you can triangulate them super fast with, you know, faster than any image sensor can do. We were doing like crazy Polhemus style magnetic trackers and trying to make those linear, you know, with all kinds of metal around. And one of my favorite prototypes was this direct retinal laser scan system that I did the electronics for, which actually rasterized a laser beam on your eyes. And it was synchronized, the video card was synchronized to the laser beam, so we could render 2 scan lines in front of the laser beam, and it was like the 0 persistent display. We called it the telescope. You could hold it up and move it around as fast as you want, and it really had that sense of presence that we had never really felt before, just because it was so fast and so precise. But you know, our team was kind of the late night crew. We were having a lot of fun, you know, experimenting. We were all gamers, and there was another contingent in the group where we were more professional, you know. And there was like, we were always at odds of like, you guys are always thumbing your nose at this project. Like one time we made a AR system, which was just a voltmeter with some optics so that you could look at a voltmeter, as an AR display, and it had a beanie like propeller on top of it. And people were super offended. Like, why would you waste any time doing that? And it's like, we did it in the evening. It was fun, right? Give us a break. Anyway, they ended up firing me and most of the AR team. So a group of us got together. The story around the day I got fired is I went to Gabe Newell and I was going to chew him out about firing me and firing the team, and that he was killing this beautiful project that I put together. And I walked in the door. I was going to just lash out at him, and I did for like a nanosecond, and then I broke down into tears. I can't believe you're killing this project I'm working on, and no. And he told me, he's like, yeah, well, the team says you're too abrasive to work with. You're done. And on the way out the door, I said, you should just sell me that AR project. He's like, okay, it's yours. And
so you decided on the spot?
Yeah. He just gave it to me on the spot. The prototypes that we were working on were really crude. Like, I'm wearing some here, super duper crude. And you had to squint really hard to imagine that it would be anything at all. But I could tell, like, people were having fun with it. It solved all these fundamental problems. And what I had discovered was this optical property that solves all these problems with augmented reality. So there's two ways you can do augmented reality. You can try to inject light directly into your eyes and combine it with the world with a world combiner. Or in our case, we used a special optical material called a retroreflector that you can put on your table, where the light's actually emitted from the glasses and then retroreflects directly back to your eyes. And so only you can see this light that's emitted from your glasses. This was a total accident. One day I was working on trying to do a near eye display, and I was in the lab and I'd put a beam splitter in backwards. And so instead of putting the light into my eyes, I was projecting it out into the room. And one of my colleagues has a piece of this retroreflector hanging on the wall. And I saw this beautiful image clear across the lab, projected into this retroreflector.
Interesting.
It took me like months to kind of like, it kept sticking in the back of my head. Like, why did I see such a beautiful image? And then it just like clicked one day, like, this is the way we solve light fields. We can make a super wide field of view that's super low cost and lightweight and doesn't have all these downsides of a near eye system. Right. So that's what I bought from Valve. And so we started a company called Cast AR with that, super early. It was really, I got a cat yelling here. It was super early. Oculus had just did their Kickstarter. There was a lot of excitement around AR and VR. We went out and raised $15 million, almost like that.
Wow.
But the technology wasn't really evolved yet. I hadn't been a CEO before, which was a big problem. So I was too scared to do it. So I ended up outsourcing the CEO job to a professional CEO who didn't really share the same vision I did. And ultimately we cratered the company, $15 million crater in the ground.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really sad. But, again, back to timing and luck and stuff, and timing was wrong. But a group of us got together and like, we've pushed it really far. It's really good.
So it's the same product from Valve, which was developed further at Cast VR, and then you wanted to go even further with that.
Yeah, and so I started another company with some of the Valve folks, and like, well, that really sucked. We royally screwed up Cast AR, and part of the reason we didn't focus on a vertical market. We were just going to be an AR system for everyone, everywhere. It's like, let's get back to our roots. Let's bring the family together. And so we started TiltFive. We purchased the technology again from the bank. And so things have been going really well for us here now that we've focused. I'm the CEO. I'm driving the vision of the company. And fortunately for us, like some time has gone by.
Fire yourself for being too abrasive.
And
Exactly.
the time is also right. I mean, things are coming together. And, some big companies like for example, like let's say Magic Leap has raised a lot of money, right? And not produced much, but I would still think that, it pushes the technology forward, right?
Mhm.
All this investment going into VR is pushing the technology forward. And now it almost looks like the time is right. I'm feeling I have, it's one of the things that I don't have very deep expertise in, but I feel like I have to develop that expertise in this VR stuff.
Yeah, the timing's definitely right. You know what was interesting? You brought up Magic Leap. So one of the challenges we had at Cast AR was we were, AR on the table. That was what we did really well. And the promise of Magic Leap was AR everywhere.
Everywhere. Yeah.
And it was going to be whales jumping out of the gymnasium floor. It was like big promises. And so even our investors were kind of wrapped up on like, you need to like ship this product like right away, because Magic Leap's going to come eat your lunch.
Right.
And so we were unable to raise money, and there were all these challenges, and we didn't have enough time to get our act together, and we ran out of money. Magic Leap then released their product, and it was kind of like sad trumpet, right? It's
It was a little bit of a wah, wah, wah.
It's a great product. I love it. It's cool, but it doesn't do like, a fraction of what was promised in the early days. And so
Not
timing
necessarily $1 billion worth of cool.
Yeah. So we took the technology back, we refocused the company. Let's do one thing amazingly well, which is just games on the table. And let's fix the problems we have with the products. Now there's new sensors. So we put a lot of work into the headset for like the tracking and the cameras and things like that. By the way, here's some prototypes. This is the evolution of what the product started off with. So the one on the left was what I was showing at Valve, and no one believed that it could ever be shrunk down into something usable. And that was part of the friction that we were having there. Cast AR, it looked like this in the early days, to the next one to the right. And then below is what we've been able to refine it down to, is this 90-gram pair of glasses that works amazingly well with 110-degree field of view, and has these really small machine vision cameras that are super high speed, and sensor fusion that is buttery smooth. And
I love the idea of, hey, put this dead bug wire wrapped computer on your face.
Yeah,
just normal work stuff.
I shouldn't be surprised by this, but I'm always surprised. You go to an investor with something that looks like this thing in the upper right-hand corner, and you're like, trust me, it's going to be sexy and cool someday and look awesome. And they're like, but there's a wire sticking out the side and it's got hot glue on it. And like, trust me, I've done this 1,000 times. It'll look awesome. And it's super challenging to get people to kind of envision like where you can go with it. And that's
a crisis of imagination in a lot of the people with the purse strings these days.
Yeah. And they want instant returns too, which is also challenging. So if you can't get traction within a year or two, you face a lot of challenges. That was part of our challenge with Cast AR. We were just developing the technology, just trying to get it ready to go out the door. And they're like, we want to see sales, and we weren't ready yet. And
but the good news
happens all the time.
You can reach out to the community. For at least part of the funding, right? With Kickstarter campaigns like you did.
That's what we did at TiltFive. We bootstrapped the company ourselves and from some strategic investors. And we got the product into the state where it looks like a finished product. And we took it to a bunch of trade shows and like, look, it works. It does what we say. It's this amazing light field in front of you. You can focus on these virtual objects, and you can move them in and out and have your hands in the scene and stuff. And then we went to Kickstarter, after we'd shown it to thousands of people, and we were the largest ever AR project on Kickstarter.
Right.
Combined with the focus on games, make sure that we do one thing great, just understanding that other people will buy this thing and go do medical imaging or whatever with it after we achieve our first goal.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. That was something with going back to structure sensors. One thing at Occipital that we didn't foresee was that it would become this huge medical device, which basically
Mhm.
became the primary use case within, a year or two.
Yeah, exactly. You just never know when you're developing a product like that chip that did video compression. They didn't build it for that, but then you found your vertical market that makes sense.
Right.
So this is how the system works. I was talking about the retroreflector. So this is a cross section of what the game board that you fold out on your table looks like if you magnified it. So it's these little tiny lenses, these little spheres that are embedded in the surface. And so light rays from each user that strikes the surface return directly back to the user. And so that means each person has their own private view around the table, and they have their own magical holograms popping up out of the table that they can interact with. And that opens up all kinds of really cool interactions for a game developer. So like if you're doing a war simulation, you can be placing all your troops and stuff on the table, and your friends can't see that until the fog of war lifts, and then the computer simulation will let everyone see it simultaneously. Or
Right. Their own viewpoint. I mean, they're looking at it from different viewpoints, so they are going to look at this thing from different viewpoints simultaneously.
Yeah, and what's beautiful about this system too is we've solved this light field problem. That's the holy grail of AR systems, is you want to be able to focus and accommodate on all of these virtual objects at the correct focal distance.
Yeah.
And so we can set up the projectors in the headset to generate that light field without having to do huge compute to do it, or having like the Magic Leap thing where they tried to do a kind of in-between light field thing where they just brute forced it with like 2 focal depths. We have like infinite focal depths in there.
So would it be right to say that what you have built is basically what Magic Leap wants to build everywhere? It is on the surface of the table. If you focus in that area, then that's what, I mean, the grand vision of Magic Leap is to have it everywhere, but yours is on the table, with the family around it, let's say.
Yeah, that's our vision too. We want to do AR everywhere eventually. I think that's the future. Our cell phones are going to go away. We're going to have AR devices that, maybe they're not even glasses in the future, someday way down the road, but you're just going to interact with your compute just in the world constantly. So yeah, I mean, there's boiling the ocean, or there's taking a practical approach like what we did for our first product. And it's really working out well for us. People are responding well to it. And I think that's the key to success, is incremental improvements. And you can go back and you can look at technology over the years, like home computers were clunky. Like they just look so quaint today compared to what we have in our pocket, or the first cell phone, or the first PDA, just so primitive. But it was these baby steps that provided value along the way, and it got better and better. And so that's how XR is going to evolve. I also have this belief there's like a lot of work going into VR. I love VR, but it has like problems for adoption. And I actually think that VR comes after AR is hugely successful and everyone is using it. And you will seamlessly go between small AR experiences, medium AR experiences, maybe full VR with the same system, and it'll just be seamlessly presented to you in your life. So to wrap this up, so we don't stay here all day, I'll go through the specs of the system, talk about some of the machine vision stuff that it's kind of interesting. So we have a bunch of sensors in the headset. We have an IMU for measuring inertial movements. We have 2 cameras inside, and these cameras, I'm pretty proud of these. I put a lot of work into these, but these are IR cameras, and they function, or they operate in 2 different wavelengths of light. So one of them is about 160-degree field of view lens on it that covers the entire area out in front of you, and it tracks your head position and your wand. We have a magic wand that you can interact with things. Mm-hmm. Runs at really high frame rate, gets fused with IMU data to figure out where you are in the world. Then we have, on a different wavelength of infrared light, we have a high resolution 90-degree field of view camera from machine vision specifically. And that's awesome.
Drop a beat.
All right. Weird. There we go.
Okay, we're fixed.
That was awesome. But But that machine vision camera is used for tracking cards and tracking hands and objects. And talking about OpenCV, our first demos, we used OpenCV to track cards. You could put cards on the table and a little game character just springs out of the card. We used it for blob detection for like doing hand tracking. And there's a lot of fun things you can do with that camera. And what's neat about it is we've solved kind of the rolling shutter problem on high resolution cameras by filtering it with these special bandpass filters. Then we strobe infrared light out from the headset, so we get a freeze frame of the environment in front of you with no motion blur. And
yeah, rolling shutter is a big problem. Could you, Jeri, maybe just briefly describe like what the issue is for maybe people in the audience who aren't familiar?
Yeah, on your cell phone, most of those, almost all of them, are rolling shutter, and so they expose scan line at a time. So over time, they're scanning down. And so when you move, say, your phone, or if it's on a headset, you move your phone, you get kind of a trapezoid shape to your images. And it's really hard to correct for that and do machine vision. Sometimes it blurs features together, so you can't like pull out features because it's kind of stretching things and blurring things. And then also it's changing the geometry of the image, so you can't do an accurate measurement on it. And so what we've done is we do a global exposure mode in these cameras, and we, like a photo flash, we go boom, a really, really short, intense infrared flash, freeze frame everything, and then we scan out the image. And so you have like perfect image to work with. And so we do that on the headset and what we call the tangible tracking camera.
Right.
So for not much money, we can
Right.
have the performance of like, you know, these $3,000 and $4,000 machine vision cameras that are global shutter.
Right.
And each one of our kits, when you get it, if you're just a consumer, you can just use it to play the hundreds of games. We went out and worked with third-party developers to bring tons and tons of games. Some are action games, some are board games, simulation sandbox games, things like that. But if you're a developer, every one of these is also a developer kit. So in the install, you have all the tools for Unity and Unreal so that you can start developing for it. And machine vision camera is right there for you. So you can start doing all your own machine vision work with it.
It's a great platform for developers. And, you know, with all these things going in the hands of people now, there's a big early market as well.
Yeah. And so we have a developer program. So for any of the folks that are listening right now, you can reach out to us. And if you have a project and we get excited about it, we can set you up with some hardware and get you developing on the system. Or you could just go, you know, pre-order a kit today. This is how, for those that want to know some of the nitty gritty of what's going on in the headset, we're super proud of what we call our reprojection engine. So we can plug into tablets and phones and PCs. And so what's great about development on a PC is you can do it in real time. So you can be working in, say, Unity and Unreal and moving objects around and see it happen instantly on the board right next to you. And then also, if anyone's developed for like virtual reality systems, there's these really stringent requirements on frame rate for VR systems. You got to hit a minimum frame rate. And so that was a problem, like especially if you want to go to lightweight systems like phones. And so this reprojection system we put in the headset takes images from the game engine, then upscales the frame rate. Actually, I see this is wrong in the slide. I need to update that. It's 180 frames per second. It gets upscaled. And then we do a reprojection, which means we do transforms on the image 180 times a second to compensate for your head motion. So that allows the game engine to run asynchronous to the glasses. So if there's a hitch or there's a frame dropped or something, you don't even notice it because the engine in our headset will just compensate for that. So that opens up opportunities for like variable frame rate on the application, or even streaming, like if you want to stream this over 5G or something like that, where you don't have deterministic frames coming to it. our headset can compensate for that. Then we have a bunch of other goodies in there, like speakers and microphone that you can do stuff with as well. So I think it's been a long session. I'm sorry, everyone, but
no, thanks. I mean, this has been amazing.
Don't apologize. This is great.
Yeah, I hope folks get excited about this. Feel free to reach out to us. I hope that the OpenCV community will do a lot of really fun things with our camera system that we've provided, and I'm just super excited to see what people do. Out of
it
the
seems like a great place to get started, even if you've never done some computer vision tasks, because you have these purpose-built cameras in there.
Yeah, and it's great too because it's all time-stamped and correlated to the user's head position. So that's another challenging thing in machine vision. So if you have a lot of head motion or your phone is moving, you have to compensate for that. So we provide the tools just right in our plugin to deal with that, right out of the box. So if you need to know pixel accurate where you place that playing card on the table, you can do that easily with our system versus, other systems where you have no concept of what the physical world is like.
Yeah, totally.
If somebody backs it, I know the Kickstarter campaign is obviously over. You're delivering within a few days. If somebody buys it, pre-orders it now, what is the expected delivery time?
With the global supply chain problems right now, we're pushing hard to start the shipments of the Kickstarter backers just any day now. That's going to happen. We're going to do an announcement soon about that. It's probably going to take us a few months to get our back order fulfilled. We're a year late on our Kickstarter. So in that entire time, people have been buying kits off of our website, so we have to fulfill those as well. So it's going to be next year, Q1 of next year, when you could just go to the website, buy one, it'll show up immediately.
That's great. I mean, I'm actually looking forward to it. This is one of the areas where, like I was mentioning, that I would like to develop more expertise myself. And there are a bunch of headsets that I'm planning to experiment with. So,
ooh, yay! Awesome. I can't wait.
Jeri, can you unshare your screen real quick there?
Yes, I can.
I think we did go over pretty far, but there is one question that I would like to ask, which I thought was a really interesting one that was not technical, but I think you might have some unique thoughts about. Which is you talked a lot about mentorship and how you were, kind of that timing where you kind of happened to find the right people to believe in you at the right time and help you develop in your career, and also that you tried to pay that forward a bit. Do you have any insight into how do those relationships work really well, and what advice would you give to people on both the mentor side and the mentee side?
That's a great question. I think the reason it worked really well for me was I was so eager to learn the topic, and people that like to mentor usually kind of want that warm fuzzy feeling of there's somebody that I can pass my wisdom to. A lot of my mentors are decades older than I am. That doesn't mean you can't have a young mentor too. I have young mentors as well. But, when I was just getting started, they were all much older than I was. And, like the machinist, he was a single guy working in this machine shop. People came in and had him do stuff, but they really didn't care about the skill and craft that he had. So I'd go there and I would just be in awe in his ability to machine metal and, work with these tools. And that was a good feedback loop. My mentor that helped me become a better business person, he wanted to see me succeed. He saw my struggle and he was sharing in the struggle, and probably also kind of related to like struggles in his own career, trying to like figure out how to be more professional. And so whenever you can find situations where someone might be wiser in an area and you can give that feedback, it works beautifully. And I think if you're going to be a mentor, same thing, look for that eager person that's going to, really, take what you say and run with it. For many years, I used to do a mentor program with high schools and junior highs, where I would go in with some junk electronics and we would take it apart. And then, these were all working devices, and we put them back together and see if they worked at the end. Usually they didn't, but that's okay. I usually had a couple favorites in the classes. So, there were kids that you could tell really were into it, and others that were just there because their parents wanted them to be there.
Yeah,
And
well,
so,
that enthusiasm, it goes both ways. I think was part of what you're saying here is that I think it's necessary for both sides to like really want to see the other succeed or really want to learn from each other. It's not a one-way street necessarily.
I think the other thing too is not to be afraid to ask. So in my career, thinking back to like that Commodore chip situation, out of necessity, I had to figure out how to tape out a chip. So anyone that would listen, I would ask them, like, do you know how to tape out a chip? Can you help me? I really, really want to learn how to do this. And other times in my life, I would be probably too scared to admit that I don't know something, and I wouldn't ask. And so, being forced to be a little bit more humble out of necessity helped me along the way.
Yeah, I really identify with that for sure.
It's hard. It's hard because, especially when you're do engineering like I do, like most of my engineering over the years was like kind of contract gigs. I'd go in for 6 months or something, solve a problem. And you have to go in with gusto and say, they ask you like, can you solve this problem? Like, yes, I can solve that problem. And in the back of your mind, like, I have no effing clue how I'm going to solve this problem. And I suffer from imposter syndrome perpetually, even today, right? It's just,
well, that's common because most of the things that you take on is always going to be beyond a bit beyond your capability, and you have to grow into it, as you're doing on the job, so to speak. And that's always what is the most exciting about entrepreneurship as well.
I had a mentor not too many years ago kind of summarize it for me that I thought this was great. He said, Jeri, when you're looking for projects to work on, there's 3 types of projects. There's an easy project anybody can do. It's easy. You know exactly how to do it. Knowing you probably shouldn't do any projects are easy. Like, you're probably not going to, do your best work because you'll be bored with it. There's impossible projects that are impossible. Don't do those projects either, because you're not going to have the right attitude going into it because it's impossible, right? Find the projects that if you thread a couple needles perfectly, you can succeed. And if you squint real hard, you can see how you can kind of connect the dots and make it happen. And that was, I think, a really wise way to put it. And I think about that a lot. It's like the whole AR, XR space. Like, if I wanted to do the magic leap, boil the ocean in one go, I don't know how I would do that, right? It's just too much to do in one go. TiltFive, on the other hand, like, man, I can make magic, freaking holograms on the table for people that they're going to love.
Right.
It's going to be hard, really hard. I have to thread a few needles, but man, I can do that.
That's amazing advice. That's really good advice.
Yeah, thank you for that. You want to take us home, Satya?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeri. This has been a pleasure talking to you. Amazing experience. You are such an inspiration for all of us. And
sorry it went like an hour, 15 minutes over.
It's okay. I mean, as long as it is interesting, I did not want to interrupt you. In fact, I rescheduled a meeting right now on the fly.
I'm so sorry.
I guess
So
that's the first
sorry.
time that's happened.
No worries at
No,
all.
you were just too interesting. It was, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want to
No.
interrupt because you are such an inspiration for all of us, the kinds of work that you have done and the sheer boldness of it. It's it's amazing. So thank you so much for being here, and thanks all the audience. People who left would be able to see it on our YouTube channel, and I encourage you to check out the developer program at Jeri's company TiltFive, and also Phil Nelson. Thank you so much again for putting this show together.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Next week our guests will be Team Coletta of OpenCV AI competition. They were second place or third place. I can't remember now. But same bat time, same bat channel, 9 a.m. Thursday Pacific time. Thanks so much for watching this episode of the webinar.
Please hit that like button, subscribe, and don't forget to tap the little bell icon to be notified when new episodes drop.
This week's episode was brought to you by OpenCV Courses. Learn computer vision from the experts at opencv.org/courses.
If you'd like to be in the audience next week, subscribe to the OpenCV newsletter.